welcome to a new episode of In Other Words with Danielle and Zara.
This is a podcast where we talk about a wide variety of different subjects, from gossip to sustainability. So in other words, we talk about all the things.
Danielle, how are you today?
I am well, thank you. I'm very tired.
I'm so sorry.
But I'm good otherwise.
I'm glad.
Indeed. And how are you?
I am well. I am moving soon. When you hear this, I will already be moved, and that is terrifying.
Very, very scary. She's moving to KZN, which is extremely far away.
It's too far away.
You might as well be moving to Antarctica. Really.
It's just as cold out here. Cool.
Anyway.
So today's episode is a heavy one.
Mm-hmm.
I've been wanting to do this episode for a really long time, but obviously we want to be sensitive, and I think what's difficult about talking about this subject is we are two very privileged people.
Mm-hmm.
We're not both white, but regardless, there's certain things about oppression that we will never understand.
Yeah.
So that we're just putting that out there.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, in case I've left you in suspense for so long, we are talking about racism.
Racism. So fun.
Ooh.
Except it's not.
No,
so
it's
get
not.
that out of your head. Yeah. It is a very nuanced topic, and we're going to try to go into as many things as we can.
Yes.
But obviously, we try to keep these episodes as short as possible. I know you might not you might not think that, because we range from like 30 minutes to an hour.
Yes.
And then that might be extremely long for you, but it's just because some topics are quite dense.
More.
And like we could speak about these topics for freaking ever.
This is true.
So yeah, there's a lot of nuance. I'm sorry if we don't cover everything.
Yeah.
We'll be happy to talk about other aspects of it in a different episode. But yeah, we're gonna dive into it, I guess.
Yes, I think we'll just have a discussion about thoughts around it. And our hope for this and for the podcast as a whole is that it will get you having conversations about these topics and like thinking for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
So we are living in South Africa, so we will approach it from a South South African perspective.
Yes,
obviously. And yeah, I'll reiterate again that we acknowledge our privilege, where we stand. Obviously, I'm a white person living in South Africa, so that's a whole new dynamic.
At least you're a woman, so you experience some sort of...
No. I mean... Okay. So racism, I will just read a little definition.
Yes.
So racism is prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism by an individual, community, or institution against a person or people on the basis of their membership of a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized.
Yes.
Cool.
Okay, so you've probably heard this all your life. I hope you have.
I hope so too.
Learning about this idea of racism.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the two main things that come up for me is just stereotyping and boxing people, number one, and oppressing.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen racism, honestly, throughout the last 100 years, specifically the last 200 years. That's the racism that we're studying now currently. So like you do the Holocaust in school, we did Jim Crow laws and the civil rights movement and apartheid. And I think those are like huge examples, and because of the fact that the Holocaust is done, because of the fact that there was freedom in the US, and because of the fact that we are no longer under an apartheid regime, a lot of people are of this opinion that racism no longer exists, which is the furthest thing from the truth.
Yeah.
And I think what's dangerous about this is when we don't talk about these things, when we don't recognize and call these things out in ourselves and in other people, it just is a breeding ground for trouble. And you know, someone can make a racist joke or believe a racist thing, but to a person who is maybe very unstable and very mean, like you're planting seeds. And I think that any leader that has been known for having incredibly racist tendencies, it all started somewhere, which is what like scares me a little bit about how rife racism still is. Is it's not going to die out in a generation, because racism is learned.
It takes work. And I think, you know, the thing about living in South Africa, and I think it's very similar in America as well, probably any place where there has been it's like especially like racism at a systemic level.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that it won't be the same if it wasn't at a systemic level.
Yeah.
But it's that a lot of these things, I mean, you think about it, apartheid ended only in 1994. I mean, some would argue that it ended in like 1990 when, I think it was 1990 when Nelson Mandela was released, but officially it ended in 1994.
Yes.
And I mean, the Jim Crow laws in America were also dropped in, what, 60s, 70s?
Yes. I will not
Something
be
like
able
that.
to tell you the date.
Something like that. And the thing is, I mean, these people are still alive today. I mean,
exactly.
yeah, like if you are a black person, if you're my age and you are black or colored or anything like that. By the way, if you're not from South Africa, colored is not a derogatory term
Yes.
here.
No.
Do not cancel me. It is a legitimate ethnic group.
Yes.
If you're my age, like your parents would have experienced apartheid. My parents
Yes.
experienced apartheid. And if they are not like prone to changing, especially like white people in South Africa, I mean, you still kind of pass down these ideas of racism.
Yes.
Even if they're not violent or anything like that, you still kind of you're taught that
pattern of thought.
Yeah, you kind of taught that like people of color are inferior to you. And I'm not saying
Yes.
that every single white family is like this. My family is not,
Yes.
thankfully. But you see this in many, many places, and you'll see young people even having these like very racist ideas.
Yes.
And it's 100% taught.
Quite scary.
Yeah.
So I'll go into my story a little bit because, like I said earlier on, I've never experienced like very like hectic oppression, and I'm not black. And I'm also not white, and I'm also not colored, and that's something I really wrestled with. So essentially my story is my mom is from a white family. My dad is from a colored family, and when they got together and had me, this is what I looked like. But I haven't really been in contact much with my dad's family. So I grew up in my mom's family, the Esterhazens, and I think I kind of grew up very much as a lot of white kids have grown up. You know, like people have made fun of the fact that I'm the whitest colored person they've ever met. And I think when I was a child, it didn't bug me too much, but now that I look back, I see how it actually very deeply affected me, and it almost took quarantine for me to actually start realizing these things.
Yeah.
So when I got to high school, in my first year of high school, I was quite like bullied and spoken down upon. Sometimes it was just a joke, but it really affected me. And I was either a colored person trying to be white, or I was a white person like in a colored person's body. And that really I really struggled with that because I didn't have like a sense of identity. And what's difficult is I can't classify myself as a white person because I'm not a white person. And I can't classify myself as a colored person because with the term colored comes this very rich cultural thing, you know?
Yeah, it goes beyond skin color.
Yes.
Even,
And so I almost feel wrong to take that label because I haven't embraced the culture of either. So growing up, like, it was very, very difficult. And when I had to answer that question, I didn't really know how to answer the question. And I don't know, it always really stressed me out, this need to know your race and have that define you. And I think for the longest time, I was like, I wish that people were just like blind to race. And as I've grown older, I realized that is not the problem. The problem isn't seeing people's skin color. The problem is seeing people's skin color and defining them by that, rather than embracing the fact that often with skin color comes like culture that is incredible and very unique, and that's something to be celebrated. But I remember, like, I think it was grade 9, and I, at the time, was like watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians, and they are Armenian. That's like a country in Europe, but not a lot of people know that. And so I was like, oh my word, like, I have the same like skin color as them. Maybe I should just say that I'm Armenian so that I don't have to explain anything. And so for the longest time, I would tell people I'm Armenian.
I remember that.
I had like friends that genuinely just
thought that.
And like it was a big joke, ha ha ha, but I realized like that really mess with my identity, and I really struggled to figure out who am I actually. And then when I met the Lord, it was like, okay, I'm a child of God and I'm not defined by something like color.
Yeah.
And I didn't really, you kind of experience little like microaggressions and stuff, but I haven't, just because of the environment that I've grown up in and the fact that, you know, I act a certain way, speak a certain way, and that's been to my advantage, which it shouldn't be, but it has been. And the first time like it really hit me on a very deep, very emotional level was a couple of years ago. There was a boy, was a boy.
Will be a boy.
And we were really, really good friends, and I spent a lot of time at his house, and his dad is a very like stern European man, and like he very much fits that stereotype. Like very educated, and I remember him and I had like similar interest in books. I remember the one day like we had like such a good conversation. I think it was about a Gresham book or whatever, and I was like, wow, I'm finally like in, like we have like this point of connection. And then eventually I started, like when we hung out, he kind of always wanted to hang out at my house or like somewhere else. And
The
like,
boy, not the dad, by the way.
Yes. No. And something was up, like I just sensed it in me. And then he said, eventually, like he was very real with me, and it was a very difficult conversation, but he just said, listen, my dad was like kind of fine with us being friends, but when he asked like, are we more than friends, at the time we were like very confused about that. And he kind of said to his dad, like, I don't know. And his dad was just like, well, you will not date her because she is not white. And since then, like, I've found out a lot more about the conversation, and that is like the nice part of the conversation. There were other statements made that hits very hard, but it was very much direct racism. And I remember, obviously this hurt me like crazy, but I remember this passing thought where I was like, I wonder if I were white, if I would still be single.
Oh, hectic.
And it was almost like I realized that I had kind of pushed myself down, or there were parts of me that felt like I wasn't good enough because of my skin color. And I think that is the most dangerous thing about racism, is not so much the power that a white person has just because they have the power, but it's the fact that there's an ability to make someone of a different race feel inferior. And I mean, listen, I'm not ever going to say that only white people can be racist, because that's not the case, and we'll kind of explain a little bit when we get into systemic racism, because I think that's the main issue. Anyone can be racist, anyone can look down upon another race, but given how history, like for me it was like, okay, there's a certain standard of beauty, and there's a certain standard of like superiority, and that's white. And so that's something I really, really struggled with. And one more memory, I know I'm speaking a lot.
That's okay. You have more experience than I do.
One more memory that really sticks out to me, and I honestly think I must have been about 8, and this still like is with me, is I was with a friend, a white friend, and we were reading through, like, I think it was like the People magazine, the You magazine, I don't even know, and it always ends with like a page of missing people. And on the page there were a bunch of black people, and there was one white girl. And I remember she looked at it and she was like, oh, that poor girl.
Interesting.
And it was like, I mean, she was like young, so it's not like she had any poor intentions, but in her mind, like, she identified with this white person, and it was almost like it's a norm, like black children are missing.
It's a legit thing.
But
like,
oh shame, here's this white person that's missing. And that's like,
it really is a legit thing though. I mean, you see, and it's just the way that I think black bodies and all that are just treated in society. It's
as
like
a number.
They're a number. Like, oh, like 20 people died in the Cape Flats the other day. Like, oh well, that's normal. Oh, this white girl went missing. Like,
and we know her name.
You know her name, and they will always make sure to tell you, of course, if it is a black person that murdered her or whatever. But countless numbers of black people, and of course other like
non-white races.
Non-white races, have horrible things that happen to them every single day.
Yep.
And often even more because of the way our society is.
Yes.
But it's just not spoken about. It's not taken as greatly.
Yeah.
You know?
But should we get into systemic racism?
Yeah.
Because I think this is where we can show why specifically white people are still seen as superior.
Yeah.
Because I think when it comes to bias and just racism in general, anyone can take on that label as a racist person. Because if you are a black person looking down on a white person, like, you are racist.
Well, some people will disagree
argue.
with that.
Yes, we've had, because we were part of a discussion group, and one of the discussion points was, can a non-white person be racist? And in my opinion, anyone can be racist because it's a thought pattern.
Yeah.
But the reality is that, like, systemic racism and historical racism will say that white people were and are the racist race.
The oppressors.
The oppressors.
Okay, so institutional racism or systemic racism is a form of racism that is embedded in the laws and regulations of a society or an organization. It manifests as discrimination in areas such as criminal justice, employment, housing, healthcare, educational, and political representation.
Yes.
So I think you might be listening to that definition and think like, oh, like that we can't have that in South Africa because we have a black government.
Yes.
And all that. And I know it can be confusing, and also because black people are by far the majority, in South
I think
Africa.
it's just over 80%.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. Anyway.
Check that stat. Don't believe
but it's
everything
by
I
far
say.
the majority. But the reality is that because of our history and unfortunately due to our current form of government,
Yes.
systemic racism is still very evident in our country.
Yeah. And I think, you've said this multiple times to me in one episode, is I think the difficulty is people say, okay, but now we've had equal rights for so long, and like we can't, like black people, colored people, any non-white person can't play the victim card any longer because you've had time now. We all have equal rights. But the issue is that it is generational.
Yeah.
And a person will say, oh, but that black boy came out of that community and he took charge of his life.
Yeah.
And look, if he can do it, why can't everyone else?
Yeah.
But the reality is, like, people are born into poverty. People are born into this. And you said, if you walk, you can say that racism doesn't exist, but you can walk into every, like, impoverished area in this country and you're not seeing white people.
I think there's becoming more of a white population now, like a white population in poverty.
Yeah.
But by far still, the most people living in poverty are black people. And I think just before we discuss more, I just want to chat a bit about like just what apartheid was and how it has like related to what's happening. So when you think about apartheid, you can almost divide it into two different levels. So you have petty apartheid and you have grand apartheid. So ultimately, petty apartheid, those are like I'm not going to say small, but you know,
Smaller.
Yeah, that's like the discrimination on an everyday level. So for example, white people and black people can't go on the same bus, they can't go to the same church, they can't go to the same beach. Anything to do with just separating them on a smaller level. But ultimately what apartheid wanted to do was create separate development. So ultimately white people were going to have the majority of the land while black people were ushered into smaller homelands. And I'm not going to say any stats now because I forgot to look them up, but it was pretty much the majority of the population living in these tiny areas. And when you look at townships today, that's very much what happened.
Yes,
it's
so overpopulated and so
so overpopulated, whereas you get us living in our big fancy houses where it's 5 people in a big house. But in the townships, which is a direct result of apartheid and what they were doing in apartheid, you have thousands, millions of people living you know, super close together. And so when people, like when we say that we can still almost not blame apartheid, but like the racism and the systemic racism that is still evident is very much linked to what apartheid did to the country. And ultimately what they wanted to do was separate the races, but obviously they didn't want to get rid of black people because they were like free, cheap labor for white people,
Yes.
for the white minority. So yeah, we can see that happening still today,
Yes.
unfortunately.
And it takes years and years and years for anything like that to
Yeah,
change.
it does.
And systems need to change.
They
and
do.
That's just hasn't been the case.
It hasn't been the case. And I a while ago during the riots in Durban and Joburg, KZN, woohoo. I saw this post that kind of irritated me. It was basically saying how, like white people, like we've engorged ourselves and we're driving around in our fancy cars and our fancy houses, and these people who are rioting now have looked at this and are now like really angry. And that like rubbed me the wrong way, because like, first of all, I don't disagree with it. I fully recognize that there's a serious inequality in wealth and all that kind of stuff. But no matter how much money the wealthy give away, and when I say wealthy, I mean like middle class. I'm not talking about billionaires at this point. No matter how much money we give away, no matter how many cars we give away, it won't fix what is happening in our country. And that's because the system is rigged. And I don't want this to turn into like an ANC kind of dissing thing. But honestly, a lot of things could have been done better. There's been a lot of corruption, a lot of cronyism, where people are put into power based on friendship and connections rather than ability. And we see there's just crazy amounts of corruption that has happened, where money that could have been used to help the people has gone to houses and private jets and all those kinds of things. And of course, I mean, you still have people in businesses, white people, white CEOs, whatever, who have massive say in government to prevent change. I'm not denying that. But a lot of things could have been done differently, and there needs to be radical change now to help anything.
And accountability.
And
which is another
accountability.
thing.
Yeah.
But I think what's difficult is that as let's just say a white person, it's like, okay, finally apartheid is over. Now we have a black government in power, so now things should change. But let's just say as an older white person, I still have prejudice, but I also, it's like I'm trying to find the balance, because I want people to be free and be equal. But now I see like how miserably the black government has failed, and in my mind I'm like, well, see, we gave people the power and look what they've done with it.
That's the problem,
then it just perpetuates more racism, because you associate black people with what the current black government has done, which is so unfair.
When anyone criticizes our government, I like really want to make it clear that
it's completely separated.
I am not basing this on race whatsoever. Like we have seen white governments who are very, very corrupt and horrible. So if criticizing the government is fine, it is good, there needs to be accountability. But to blame it on race is ridiculous and very unfair.
And I think it's just how the world works. Apart from money, education is important. Education for me currently is one of the biggest struggles, because people don't have access to education, like proper quality education. And that's so sad to me, because I honestly think if those who have been oppressed and have lived in poverty had education, they'd be able to move so far beyond where they're at. But if you don't have access to that as a starting point, how the heck do you get out of your situation? It's like, okay, I go to a school, but I can't pass matric because I don't understand. I mean, a friend of mine who's a teacher has been giving lessons to schools in some struggling communities, and the teachers are teaching English and it's their third language, but they need teachers, and so here these teachers are, and they don't even understand the material themselves because they haven't been given that opportunity. So the students suffer. And it's like, okay, let's just say that you've worked your butt off, but now it's like, okay, now I need to get into varsity. Chances are I'm not going to be able to study something in my home language, so that's barrier number one, but we can get through that. It's like, okay, there are a certain number of bursaries. I just happen to be a person who can't get a bursary, so now I get a study loan. However, for the bank to give me a loan, they have to see credibility, but I'm living in a township.
No.
So it's like, okay, I'm not going to get a study loan. I can't go to varsity. Do you know, it's just like, it's so difficult. I don't think people understand how difficult it is, even if you work hard. And the reality is, like, with a lack of education also comes this, well, now I need to move to a life of crime, or you know, now
there's no other option.
I have no idea. I never learned about birth control. I'm just gonna keep popping out the babies. Like, there's so many things that are like hinge on education, and that's really, really sucky. Because the reality is that there isn't access to decent education for the majority of this country.
I know, that's what is honestly one of the most pressing issues in our country at the moment, you know, because it just happens to be like we have pretty good schools in our area, but most of the schools in the townships or close to the townships, like, they are just simply not good. Like, teachers won't pitch, teachers won't understand the work, children can't pitch because, I don't know, their parents couldn't take them to school. They have to walk 10 kilometers to school.
Listen, if you have a heavy period and you don't have access to...
No, exactly. To sanitary pads or anything like that,
you're staying home for a week.
And it is really just such a vicious cycle like that. And
that's the thing, it is a cycle. That's what I think people don't understand, is they're like, it's been over 20 years, so how is it possible for us to still be living in like inequality? But it's a cycle.
And
it's
even
not, oh my word, it's been over 20 years. It's only been over 20 years.
And I think unfortunately, because the level of schooling is honestly just so poor for the majority of our population, like, even if people get into varsity, because it's really difficult to pass certain subjects, like my cousin studies engineering, and she says a lot of the black students really struggle with it, not because they're stupid, but because the foundational level of schooling was just simply substandard.
So my one question for you, that I think it's important for us to unpack, is affirmative action. What are your thoughts on affirmative action? Because it's become quite a controversial topic.
I think overall affirmative action and affirmative policies like that are not a bad idea. I think they are very much needed, especially when a group has been pushed down for so long, because hypothetically what affirmative action should do. So let's say, like, I, as a white person, I'm starting at the front here, right?
Yes.
But a black person is starting
5 steps before the starting line.
They're like behind me. And what if we didn't have affirmative action? It would simply be like, okay, now go live your life and do your things. Affirmative action should help people get to the starting line.
At least the starting line, yes.
And go from there, you know what I mean? And unfortunately in South Africa it has not done that. We have a few policies, EEE, I think it's now BBEE or something. So
it was interesting because they put affirmative action in place, and then there was broad-based
I literally can't remember, but go Google it. Go Google the definition.
I should know this. I'm embarrassed.
I literally can't remember. Anyway,
economic empowerment. Yes, Black economic empowerment. Sorry, BEE. And this was basically exactly what you just explained. However, they noticed that it was kind of targeting like an upper class black community, like a group. So then they introduced broad-based Black economic empowerment, which was supposed to be for a more broad community. However, it's kind of been the same thing. And so again, I think the issue is that affirmative action is such a good thing in theory. It's just like freaking communism. It cannot be implemented. It's been implemented poorly.
It hasn't been implemented properly here. I believe it could have been, it should have been, but it hasn't been.
It's sad. And then another thing maybe you can explain, and we can discuss how we view it and our thoughts, is white privilege.
So I do have a definition. Let me just find it. Okay. White privilege is inherent advantages possessed by a white person on the basis of their race in a society characterized by racial inequality and injustice. So basically, you can easily see that in this country. Most of the people living in wealth, even if it's not like super wealth, are white people. Most of the people not living in wealth are people of color. And I think white privilege, when you say this to someone, it can be really offensive because they take it as like, oh, you're saying I didn't work for what I have.
Yes.
You're saying that I'm just given stuff because of my race. And I don't think white privilege is saying that. It's saying, like, you have had to work hard, but it's been easier for you to work hard, you know?
Yeah.
Like, you have been given more opportunities automatically. And I think
this is in a majority sense, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
there are, like I said, there's for sure, like, poor white people who are not as advantaged as others.
Yeah.
But even, I think we need to take away the idea that white privilege is only linked to economic things.
Yeah.
Because it can also just be related to people's attitudes toward you.
Yeah.
Like we said
sure.
earlier, like, white people, like, crime is taken more seriously than others. Yeah, so it can be just general attitudes. It doesn't mean that you could automatically going to be rich, you know?
Mm-hmm. And I think something that is important is I think we need to get out of this mindset of white people, like, saying we need to hold the white people accountable and they need to, like, apologize for their privilege. Because, you know, the reality, someone says, like I've seen someone say, like, how can I apologize for apartheid if I wasn't even born? And there's no call to apologize. It's just, for me, a call to recognize your privilege and say, okay, I can recognize that I've kind of had it easier in this life because of my skin color, because of my socioeconomic issues, and just be sensitive and be more aware.
And you can
I can say that as a person who isn't white, that I've benefited from white privilege. You know?
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. And I think, I lost my train of thought. My dog started barking and now all the thoughts went out of my brain.
Hugo literally wants to be a part of every episode of ours.
He really does. So we were talking about white privilege.
Yes, and I said I've benefited from white privilege.
Yes. I think it also just leads to conversations about colorism in general. And, like, this is not even necessarily related to, like different ethnic groups, like racism against each other, but even, like, within races, people who have, like, lighter skin are treated better than people who have darker skin, which is pretty crazy.
No, for sure. Do you have anything else to say about systemic racism?
I am looking. Basically, what I did want to say just quickly about white privilege and like, attitudes and all that kind of stuff, and also just linking to affirmative action. I think often what happens is, like I said, it leads to, like, often more racist ideas, and also just disrespecting Black people or other people of color in general. Because, you know, if someone says, oh, I got this really cool job, or I got into this degree, like, I got into medicine, then it's like, oh, you only got in because you're Black, you know, like, completely disregards people's hard work. And all of that kind of stuff. So that is one thing I think I wanted to say. And I think that's all.
Yes. I think before we move on to unconscious bias, because that's a huge thing, is the one thing is I also want to, as a Christian, recognize how the religion of Christianity and the church have played a part in racist systems. Like the Holocaust.
Well, the Holocaust wasn't necessarily a Christian thing. Hitler didn't like any religion. Just so you know.
Fair.
But the churches were complicit.
Yes. And I mean, in apartheid, a lot of church leaders were very much involved in this. And it's so funny because we sing Oh Holy Night. We were talking about it the other day. And it's like there's this verse about, like, the Lord freeing us from slavery and oppression. And it's like people sang that years ago with, like,
no, they just ignored.
Yeah, it's like we sang this in churches during apartheid, but, like,
I wonder if churches
did we even know what we were singing? It's a lot to think about. Yes, and it's like along with Christianity came colonialism, and we spoke about that in another episode. So Christianity has often been seen as the white person's religion, but we look at the Bible. Jesus wasn't white, by the way. Is God speaks so very clearly about embracing diversity. Like, he speaks about how in his kingdom we will be neither Jew nor Gentile nor this nor that, and diversity is something to be embraced, especially within the church. And
absolutely.
So that's just something I wanted to say.
And I think it's still sad to see that so many people who claim to believe in the Lord perpetuate such racist ideas. I won't give any examples, obviously, but
It's
you can look for yourself.
If you know Danielle well enough, you know. I'll
does
tell
that
you
mean?
later. No, who you're talking about.
Oh yeah, I was like,
No. Danielle's just a racist Christian.
sheesh. Said that for you.
Guys, I hate when she says that.
Okay, so I think we can move on to unconscious bias. If we have
Yes.
forgotten to say anything, it is what it is.
Yes.
You can talk about it with us at another time.
Yes.
So, unconscious biases are social stereotypes about certain groups of people that individuals form outside their own conscious awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So, everyone holds unconscious beliefs about various social and identity groups, and these biases stem from one's tendency to organize social worlds by categorizing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so for me, with unconscious bias really is unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
So it's these thoughts that we have where we judge people, specifically in this episode, we're speaking about judge people by their race without even realizing it.
Yeah.
And I think there is such an importance in unlearning things.
Yeah.
And so, for example, like the one thing that I've seen in society, and I think even when I was younger, I kind of felt this a bit, is when you are describing a person, when you describe a black person, you almost feel like it's a dirty word. Like you're like,
Yeah.
that like black person, or someone will say there was a man, and like, I'm not being racist, but he was a black man.
Like,
It's like,
you are being racist then. Like,
yeah, it's like, or like you're thinking it's a dirty word, and it's not.
it's not.
Like, race is a thing, and we've been classified in this country as black, colored,
yeah.
Asian is on the form, other is on the form,
Yeah.
white is on the form. I just click other because I'm so confused. It's
Yes,
okay.
But that's interesting though, because a lot of racism and also unconscious bias is just related to othering others. So putting people who
Yes.
aren't like you in this group of
Yes.
other. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think, it's also that mindset of an us versus them thing.
It is,
It's
exactly that.
And it's to an extent normal because we tend to cling to people who are the same as us.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not poorly intended. However, it is important that we unlearn the thoughts that come with that.
Yeah.
And I've always said, like, I so badly wish I could embrace diversity more, but I don't have a single close black friend. And that is literally just because I've lived in this little white society. And
That's the thing. It's, I mean, living where we live in Durbanville, like the schools that we go to, the churches that we go to, all of
there are
that.
like 4 black people in our church, maybe.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit more, but not much.
No.
But I mean, just if you look at the geographics of our area, like it's a lot of white people, especially in the middle class.
Yeah.
Of course, if you go literally 10 minutes away, then there's like a whole township.
Yes.
But people do tend to stick to their own groups, which is psychologically normal.
Yes.
Like we do tend to gravitate towards people like us, and often I would say it's not so much, I mean, it can be due to skin color, but it's often more due to class.
Yes.
So that's something to think
100%.
about.
Yes.
Racism and classism is very, very interlinked, especially in this country.
And another thing that I've noticed in myself, and I've really had to slap myself on the hand a few times, especially in the last couple of years, praise the Lord for growth and maturity,
Yes, we love that.
is when I was younger, I hear someone with a non-white accent talking, and I immediately assume that they're less educated.
Yeah.
And that's something that I seriously had to like call myself out on, because how the heck did a white accent
Yeah.
become like the standard of education?
Literally.
There are lots of stupid white people.
So many.
There are lots of stupid people in
So
every
many.
race.
Yeah, I think.
Not you, of course.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think it's quite interesting because I've heard, from black people that I know, like people in my class, in an academic setting or even in a corporate setting or whatever, they will speak in a white accent, even though
Yes.
naturally they don't have that accent.
Yes.
Like if they speak to their friends or their family, then they speak in their normal accent because they literally speak a different language.
Yes.
But to fit in and to be taken more seriously, they have to adopt this English white accent.
Yes.
And it sounds
Which
funny
is
to
like-
say like, oh, there is a white accent, but there kind of is.
There is. And even just this idea of like, as a white person, or even me, because I speak with a typically white accent, is how is it fair to ask a black person, for example, to tell me their English name or their white name?
Yeah.
Or like asking an Asian person,
Like,
but like,
what is your English
what's
name?
your English name? And it's like a lot of people are like, that's okay, they'll tell us. But how is that okay and how is that fair?
I know.
To like, they are in the majority, non-white is in the majority in this country, but yet the majority of this country have to kind of bow to certain white thoughts just to kind of fit in, which is so sad. Like, the least I can do in my unlearning and relearning is to try and pronounce someone's name.
Like, it's
come
not
on, bare minimum.
It's not that difficult.
No, and if it's difficult and you struggle, that's okay. But you can learn.
You can learn.
You know?
You can learn. I think something that goes hand in hand with unconscious bias is just the concept of microaggressions.
Yeah.
So just a quick definition. So microaggressions are so it's an indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group. And I mean, this definition says indirect, but it can be direct sometimes. Yeah. So just some examples of like different microaggressions, you know, just relating to the whole speaking thing again, is if someone says to a black person, like, oh, like, you speak really well for a black person, or like, you're really pretty for a black person.
So
and you hear that. I've heard that
scary.
so many times.
Yeah, when your hair is like more white, for example, or like you straightened your hair, it's like, oh my god, your hair looks so nice.
Like,
what the heck?
Yeah, like, why doesn't it look nice otherwise?
Yes.
But yeah, these are really something I hear very often. And I'm sure a lot of you listening can also relate to that.
Yes, and like, we're guilty of these things too.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and I think that's the thing. It's like often unconscious, and we have to just be intentional. Another example is we, especially as a woman, like, I think because we fear crime more, but you see like a black man, for example, and you're almost, your guard is up more so than if it was a white person.
Exactly.
Which is so scary. And it's
ridiculous.
Like, the reason for the fact that like crime is so rife in non-white areas is because of the circumstances that people are unfortunately living in. But like, race doesn't determine things like that. So it's like, when you grab your like bag a little tighter because you see a black person, that is a microaggression that you need to sort out.
And microaggressions, while you may hear the name and think like, oh, it's not that big of a deal, it can be as hurtful as anything else.
Yeah.
You know, because if you are a person of color, I mean, you're gonna, unfortunately, a lot of people will deal with a whole lot of microaggressions every single day, and it all builds up, and it's all very disheartening, I can imagine.
For sure. And I think like one of the ways we solve this is just talking to people different, like from us or to us, different from us.
Different to us.
It's different to us.
I don't
English. I don't know. But like, the one thing that I never ever realized was, you know, when you have a gardener or whatever, you call him the boy.
Yeah, or the girl.
Or the girl. And like, for a lot of people that is just a normal thing. But after like a conversation I had like 2 years ago, I realized that that's actually very offensive.
You're completely infantilizing these grown up people.
And to us, we're not, let's just say, I mean, I don't really call people, you know, I don't even have a gardener. I think we have a gardener, but I don't even look at the garden ever. It's very bad.
I thought you were going to say I don't even look at the gardener, and I was like, oh, okay.
Well, I don't do that either. I don't even see when I got it.
Yeah.
But the reality is that, you know, unless you talk to people, like, you won't learn and change.
Yeah.
And so someone can call a gardener a boy, just be like the boy, and like have the purest intentions and not know how offensive that is until they talk to the person.
And even like calling everyone out who does this, if you have separate cutlery and crockery for
that, for me, is
your domestic workers,
that's
like, maybe you should think about that, because what are you saying? Literally, what are you saying?
Oh, that's really scary.
And people still do that.
Yeah. And also understanding the history behind things like the N-word and all of these things. A lot of people are like, well, it's
not a big deal.
Why is it like, it's not a big deal?
It's in my favorite song, so why can't I sing it?
Yes. But when you learn the history behind this, and we're not going to give you a whole history lesson now, you understand why that's offensive. So learn these things.
Yeah.
And like, call yourself out. I have to call myself out a lot. I don't even realize it. I just assume Asian people are all smart. But that is a hectic stereotype.
It is a hectic stereotype.
What? They are stupid Asian people, just like they're stupid everything people. They're stupid other people. So yeah.
References herself.
So that's kind of like, I think I've covered all my notes now.
Yeah. I think just in general, good representation, diversity, these are all key things to unlearning like our stereotypes and our biases against other races.
Also,
And-
just like a lot of, I think, just because of past hurt, we assume that like most white people are racist.
Yeah.
When
It's not always the case.
no, I don't think I know like maybe two
And especially not
white racist people.
Especially not like intentionally.
Yeah.
Not to say that unintentional racism is better or good,
No.
but a lot of people are open to learning,
Yes.
especially if they are young.
Yes. And we have to be able to allow people to grow.
Yeah. And I think
Can't
it's
cancel people
yeah,
if they
No.
want to grow.
no, I think it's important, just that you take the opportunity to educate yourself. And while I say that, I don't mean a lot of people of color don't necessarily like it when like white people go up to them and say like, oh, please, can you explain to me what racism is and all that kind of stuff. Like, there are so many books that you can read. The internet is free. Go and like go read up about like maybe Black consciousness, things like that.
And also just spending time in different communities. And
Exactly.
that's something that
We all need
have
to work
wanted
on.
to do, but
Yeah.
I've been so bad at doing.
Yeah.
I
And-
literally stick to my little white circle.
Yeah.
And I'm not even white. That's a problem.
But honestly, like while you are in diverse areas, like let's say school or university or just your jobs in general,
Yeah.
like take that opportunity to get to know people around you,
Amen.
you know?
Yeah.
And then you kind of learn all of the stereotypes that you probably
Yes.
have, that we all have.
Exactly. There are white people who can dance. I've
Yes.
seen it.
I've seen it.
I've seen it.
Can I tell you, I think doing ballet as a child ruined my ability to dance. I mean, I think I can dance.
You have rhythm.
No, I have rhythm.
You can break it down.
I have rhythm, but like just freely dance because ballet is so freaking rigid.
Yeah, and disciplined.
Yeah.
Well,
Anyway, that was
tangent of no.
extremely unrelated. I'm just looking to see if there was anything else that I wanted to say. And you might think, Danielle, you didn't write this down, so you should be able to read your handwriting. But I feel like I have dyslexia right now reading this. Yeah, basically, be
Don't be
nice.
racist.
Don't be racist, please.
Yes. I think that's it, eh? This is a heavy
It
episode.
was a heavy episode.
Let us know what else you want us to talk
Yeah,
about.
I mean,
and let us know.
let us know if you disagree with anything,
Yes.
but just nicely, please.
Thank you. Haley. Cool. Well, we will see you guys in the next episode.
Indeed. Thank you so much for listening.
Woo.
And goodbye.
Bye.